I'm Elizabeth Vincentelli. I write for the New York Times and the New Yorker.
I'm Peter Marks, theater critic of the Washington Post. Welcome to another installment of Marks and Vincentelli, your one-stop shopping podcast for incisive theater news, analysis, and conversation.
Okay, and today we have a super special guest, one of Broadway's hottest composer-lyricist, Michael R. Jackson, the mind behind A Strange Loop, which is nominated for 11 Tonys, including Best Book of a Musical, Best Score of a Musical, and of course, Best Musical.
Yeah, he's all the thoughts of A Strange Loop, and anyone who's seen it knows what I mean by that. The show, let's just say, is gloriously original. I'd even say something of a groundbreaking event for Broadway. It's why I'm so excited about this show and could talk about it all day. It started off Broadway at Playwrights Horizons in 2019. Well, it actually started, I think, 2 decades ago, but Michael can tell us more about that. And after the pandemic delay, it reemerged in a refined version at Woolly Mammoth Theater in DC last December. And then returned to New York, where its Broadway opening, I dare say, was greeted with universal acclaim. I don't think there were many dissenters, certainly not in this room.
No, I'm always a little suspicious of something that is consensual, but in this case, because I'm with the consensus, of course, I think it's great. The show is... to me, I remember seeing it in 2019 and being completely struck by its balance of this scalding mix of emotional and comic and confessional tones. And it tells the story of Usher, who's now played by Jaquel Spivey, in his first professional role.
Wow.
Just graduated
Amazing.
last year. So Usher is an usher at The Lion King. And a queer black man who's writing a musical about a queer black man who's writing, it's this great Hall of Mirrors. And so it goes.
Yeah, it's both rawly emotional for me and also rendered with astonishing craftsmanship. And Michael is here with us to discuss it all. So welcome, Mr. Jackson. Thank you for doing this.
Thanks for having me.
It's a pleasure to be with you, Michael, in this very hectic run-up to the Tonys, I'm sure, for you. So thanks for making the time for us. Maybe you could talk about the long road to Broadway a little bit. Obviously that informs this piece in many ways. You infuse the character of Usher and his thoughts, we should say, the 6 actors who play all of Usher's thoughts in all their permutations are represented on the stage. But tell us a little bit about how this evolved and how you had to stick with this for so long to get it into the shape and the space it's in now.
Yeah, I started working on A Strange Loop when I was about 23 years old. It began as a monologue that I wrote right after I graduated, or like in that semester leading up to graduation. And I wrote it truly as a sort of way of sort of sorting out where I was in the world and in my place, and like feeling afraid. The world was in a very crazy moment. The U.S. was about to go to Iraq. I was living in this old lady's bungalow style house in the middle of nowhere, Jamaica, Queens. I didn't know how I was going to get a job. I had a BFA in playwriting. I wanted to be a soap opera writer and was applying for those kind of jobs. Like, it was just like a lot was going on. And I sort of just started writing this monologue to make a little life raft for myself. Just something to sort of sustain me sort of emotionally and mentally during like just a really difficult time. And, and then I went to grad school about 9 months later to musical theater writing program at NYU again. And I began writing songs, and then the songs started to work their way into the monologue, and then that monologue started to shift into a one-man show. Then I performed that one night only at Ars Nova in 2006. And then like maybe 20 people showed up and like 2 people walked out in the middle of it. I took away from that, really wanting to shape it into a quote unquote proper musical, like the musicals that I loved, albeit a probably unconventional one. something that I thought it would be, maybe I could make it into something like what used to be called a concept musical, something like Company or a chorus line, something like that. And so I started working with a theater company on the book, just to sort of start to shape it. It sort of turned into what was called a strange loop at that time. I then started I did a reading at the Lark in 2010, 11. And then I called Stephen Brackett up because he had directed some concerts of the songs. I never had heard a full reading of it with the music. I only ever done either concerts of songs or the book. Stephen read the script. We did a reading in 2012 with the music. That was the first time we did it with the concept of all Black queer people, which was an idea of Stephen's that I was really intrigued by. And then there was like a 3-year hiatus. And then Shakina Nafak approached me in 2015 to see if there was anything I was working on, because she was starting the Musical Theater Factory, which is a new hub for the musical theater development. I said, well, I've had this musical I've been working on and off for the last couple of years. I brought it in. She gave me a 2-week residency, first a writer's group, then a residency. I did a 2-week residency. I called Stephen again. I handpicked all the actors who were in it. And we did this reading, and then people sort of started to notice. Then I started getting little nibbles to do little pieces of it here and there. And then Jen Tepper called me from Fine Science 54 Below to do a concert version of it in early 2016. We did a really big splashy concert version. That's Playwrights Horizons helped let us schedule a reading for the fall of 2016. Then we did the reading in 2016, 4 days after Trump was elected, which ended up sort of, I think, weirdly helping, or at least contextualizing some of it. And then from that, no theater still would do it. And that's when my producers, Barbara Whitman and Mike Walkup from Page 73, got sort of mad and were like, we have to make this happen. So Barbara optioned it. And then we did another reading like 9 months after that. And then from that point, Playwrights Horizons thought it was ready to do. So they put a bid on it. Then a year after that, we did it at Playwrights Horizons. Then there was 2-year global pandemic. Then after that, we went to the Woolly Mammoth in 2021. And then we got the Lyceum Theater, and we landed on Broadway in 2022.
Amazing.
Okay, so I've got to say, but how do you keep the fire going through this time? Like, were there moments when you were like, that's it. No, it's not gonna. I mean, like, you just need to have the trust in yourself and in your project, because like it would have been so easy to either get discouraged or even lose interest. It's like, okay, it is what it is. Maybe it's a song cycle. Maybe it's. I don't know. It seems incredible to me. Of course, I read articles, so like one and then off to the next, but it just seems like really incredible to me to maintain that going.
Yeah, I mean, I had like sort of two answers to that. One is that, I did not have a plan B at all. Like the only other thing I was doing during all of that was working horrible day jobs that I hated. So it was like, well, right. I've got this other thing at least that I love doing, and I'm not getting paid to do it, but I love it. So I might as well just spend my time on it and keep working on it. There were no stakes. So why not, And if I had like a day job that was truly barely supporting me, I could at least, in my free time work on this. But my other answer, which is something I sort of have realized, is that as I've been talking about the show a lot, is there's just an aspect to me, I think, that like just has, a little bit of that like musical theater blood in me. Like I've been telling people that when I was working on my day jobs and I would be so demoralized and dispirited, I sometimes would sit at my desk and I would to psych myself into getting up out of my chair to do work for my boss. Under my breath, over and over I would go, get yourself to new orchestrations, new routines, a red velvet curtain, get up that hat for the baby, photographs in front of the theater, get an agent, and a jig time. You'll be being booked in a big time, And I just think there's like a little bit of the Mama Rose in me of like, I'm gonna get my kids and get out, you know.
Oh my
It's
God.
like
There's just something.
it's like you lived inside the musical a little bit too. It sounds like that's
Yeah,
hilarious.
like that's, I mean, there's this very thin, in A Strange Loop, there's this very thin line between life and art. And I think that sort of was true in my life as well, that I wanted to do it.
Mm.
And I I wanted to do it more than I didn't want to do it.
That's good. That's well said. I also wonder if
And I
somehow
also had a lot of people encouraging me. I mean, I had a lot of people along the way, like at key moments, really encouraging me. And I think that was a big piece of it as well.
But it also seems as if the piece I see on Broadway, and I saw it at Playwrights and at Woolley, in each of its manifestations, the refinements have made it a stronger piece. It's as if it was always building up to what it would finally be, and that's the wonderful thing about your account of all of the steps that it took, because somehow everything informed what eventually became A Strange Loop, at least the version we see now. It's a wonderful thing for young people to hear about how perseverance and inspiration combine and make something its best possible thing. There is no amount of time, space of time that dictates what a musical should be. In this case, it is what it is because of all that you've described.
Yeah, and that's something I really had been telling students when I speak to them and young artists, when I talk about my journey, is that the thing I learned during this whole thing was that art takes the time that it takes. And that like we live in such a product-oriented time where things are put on all these like assembly lines, and we think that like we are owed this sort of success after, 2 years or 5 minutes or whatever. And I really am quite grateful for the length of time that this particular piece took, because I think that gave me both a discipline about my craft, but it also, I think put me in a position that once opportunity came my way, I was ready both professionally and sort of psychologically, because it's very hard when something is successful and you're like this young wonderkind or something, and you get so caught up in like all the hoopla and the fame and the fortune. I've seen it happen like to people, and because I didn't have any sort of real success until I was about 38, I was like a grown man who was like had other priorities and was able to focus on just doing the work and not being distracted by all the other things. That's why I continue to work on it. Because there are so many people like, well, you want a Pulitzer, so you can just put your feet up. And I'm like, oh, no, because I'm also not confused. I know how this business is. And like people are like really looking at it and listening, and they're waiting for you to make a mistake. And they're waiting to pick it apart. And even now, there are people who do it. And that's fine. But I think because I spent the amount of time I spent on it, it can actually withstand that kind of scrutiny.
Yeah, that's very well said.
Yeah. Can you walk us through some of the changes that you made over the years? Like, let's say since 2019, let's Playwrights, Horizons, and then Woolley. Because I know, for instance, between Playwrights and Woolley, like, the recasting of Usher was played a part, and I think you kind of tailored the character a little bit more to what Jaquel was bringing to the part, and that's interesting to me because it means like the text is not fixed, so it could be. How do you work with that? How do you work with the director and the performer?
Well, let me actually take a little bit of a step back right before Playwrights. So, right before Playwrights Horizons, I think it was like 4 or 6 months before we started rehearsal, and the opening number had existed as it had existed for years. And but part of my process is that when I have my scripts, I just read them over and over and over and over and over again, and just see if anything jumps out at me. And after reading the script like a bunch of times, I suddenly was like, the opening number is fine, but it's not fully doing what it can do, given what the whole piece is. And I did a 99% lyrical rewrite of it. So the opening number that everyone knows from Playwrights Horizons, right before that, every lyric in it was different except for how many minutes till the end of intermission. And what it was before was instead the thoughts weren't even really defined as thoughts per se. They were all like patrons at the Lion King.
Oh,
Like
interesting.
bugging Usher during intermission and saying, things like I don't mean to. All he wants is, so the lyric that is like, all he wants is to subvert expectation, left and right, from the black to the white, for the good of the culture. That used to be, I don't mean to get so salty, nasty, Negro on you, but someone upstairs spilled Sprite on my baby. And so it was like it was things like that. And it was very funny. And it made a certain dramaturgical sense, but it wasn't telling you who the thoughts really were and how they and Usher together were creating these moments and sort of at war with each other or not. You know what I mean? Like it really, once I landed on, it has to be telling us who the thoughts are and how they move, that it changed everything else that came after. And I brought it to Raja, my choreographer, and Stephen at a little retreat that playwrights had sent us on in the Catskills. And they were like, because they were all fully ready to go do this other opening. But then that sort of changed the whole game for us. And then they took a moment, they probably cursed my name, and then we jumped into it. And it really helped. So that was like one big change, that, most of the public, unless you had seen iterations of it before, playwrights, doesn't know that it was a big lyrical shift and a big dramaturgical one, ultimately. And then as far as after that, between Playwrights and Wooly, Jacquel was definitely like a huge ingredient just because he just has a different instrument and he's also younger and he has a certain vulnerability to him that just opened my eyes to so many things about Usher. And I mean, there were text changes, but they weren't that many. He just it reads differently in him. There were things that I did change, but they weren't I changed it because of Jacquel necessarily. It was just that him being in it informed other things that we don't need to do this. We can cut. We did a lot of cutting, little cuts and edits because we were Jacquel actually in his performance, you get this or that much more quickly. I can't pinpoint any of those things exactly right now, but I do know that was a big part of it. And then there was always, the ending was always something that had been really massaging through all the processes. Even by the end of Woolly Mammoth, we were we knew that we still were kind of working on it. And we kept working on it on Broadway up until, opening night.
Yeah, that interestingly, I was wondering about that. The musical, for those who don't know, works up to the recurring theme is of a gospel play that Usher's mother wants him to write based on
and his agent.
And as everybody basically, right? Based on, and also there's this kind of why can't you be Tyler Perry? That's the sort of the motif, and which culminates in one of the most brilliant numbers I've seen on Broadway in years, which is Tyler Perry Writes Real Life, which I think about daily. The visiting of the ancestors and my favorite character, 12 Years a Slave, is it's my favorite character. But
you get Steve McQueen to come through, or Michael Fassbender, or David. Was it David Aleo? I can't remember who
Yeah.
played him. Anyway.
But I just wanted to ask: was it the riff? Was it reaching a moment in the piece tonally? For the finale, for the last moment, for that last scene, that was particularly difficult, or were you questioning yourself about what you wanted people to leave, what headspace you wanted people to leave the theater in terms of Usher?
I definitely was, and that was something that like I had to, even after we froze, like I had to sit with the like I think of the audience as the seventh thought. So I'm always was like paying very close attention to how they were responding to certain moments, but certainly the last moment before Usher sings Memory Song and then before he sings A Strange Loop, because I wanted to make sure that like after all of the sort of insanity that we've seen, that we are landing in like a clear place that is resonating emotionally with people. And the thing that I learned that was really interesting to me is that like there's like some consistent laughs that we always get during that section that I thought meant that I was like failing. But like actually I think it showed me that the audience was with us. And but I like did a lot of tinkering around those moments.
Yeah, it's interesting. What you say. The anguish. I think about the anguish in this piece that Jacquel so beautifully embodies, but somehow in a musical, there are other sort of laws that take hold. There have to be, you can't necessarily, you can break a lot of rules, but in the end, there's a kind of overarching rule one must abide by.
Well, it's what one of the thoughts, the guardians of musical theater centrism says earlier, is that like the audience wants to know when they can go home. Right. And that to me is something that like I've heard that Marsha Norman says to her Juilliard students. I've met her, but I've never been her student or anything. But when I heard that she said, I thought, what a brilliant idea. And it's like it's placed as kind of a joke, but it ends up being like for real. Like that's actually true. I wanted to this musical, for as much as it's boundary pushing or groundbreaking in any way, it is also part of a theatrical tradition that I have great respect and reverence for. And so I did want to make sure to take care of the audience in that way. That like they're there for a reason. Because God knows how many times have I been at the theater and been like, why the fuck am I here? You don't do you need me? Like
we can relate to that.
I'm sure. Oh my God, I do this professionally for a living. But like, so I wanted to like really engage with those ideas while at the same time, obviously subverting where I can subvert.
I'm kind of intrigued by like just to put your work in a bigger picture in terms of like where do you see yourself in that musical tradition, like where you had made like a little musical reference to Mama Rose earlier, and so where do you place yourself in that continuum?
I don't know that that's really for me to say. I can only tell you the works and the artists who have inspired me in musical theater. So I don't count him as a musical influence, but though I think he's like obviously brilliant. Sondheim as a like what I take from him is that he approaches songwriting as playwriting. And that's something that like very much inspired me that I tried to do. That's one thing. But then also, I always have to give a big loud shout out to Kirsten Childs and Bubbly Black Girl Sheds Her Chameleon Skin. I encountered that piece at a point when I was very frustrated with where I was with A Strange Loop and didn't know how to proceed. I had no context for creating a work like that. And she gave me permission to watch her piece at the Lincoln Center Archives, and seeing it was just the like sort of shot in the arm that I needed to keep going with what I was doing. And similarly, when I saw Passing Strange,
right, Stu, yeah,
and then also Company was like just as a whole piece as sort of being not a straight up book musical in the traditional sense. But also, weirdly enough, things like The Lion King, because I stood in the back of that theater ushering, watching audiences watch that show. And even if the show didn't necessarily do it for me on like a deep level, the watching those people watch that show and how entertained they were by it, and that there's such a high level of craftsmanship and entertainment that they're giving an audience. I think I took something from that, even if I was going to subvert it in my own way. So, like, where do I exist in the tradition? I don't know. Like, I'm in the 2022 line of musicals that have come before me. You know,
Yeah.
I love I love Golden Age. I love experimental things. I like mixing high and low. I like, black and white stuff. Like, that's part of the sort of American tradition and the American theatrical tradition. It's a mix of so many things.
You're but you fit squarely in, Michael, the tradition of imagining this form as something that can express something new. I mean, that is sort of a Sondheimian sort of trope, but I divide musical theater these days into people who write real musicals and people who write musicals for people who think this is what a musical should be. And
Right.
There's an artificiality, a phoniness to it's losing the thread of what musical theater was meant to be in this country as an art form, as something that's singularly American. And that's the tradition that you're upholding,
Well,
Michael.
right.
And it's marvelous. It's exciting. Every moment when you create that feeling, it's revelatory, and it makes me feel like there's a future for theater and a future for musical theater. That's what you're doing.
Well, thank you for that. And I guess, like, when I look at that, I always think of like theater as being a reflection of life, like it's literally holding a mirror up. And, for some people, making theater in this time is about tearing everything up.
Mm-hmm.
And like, I think I'm a little bit of both. Like, there's
Right.
some things I want to hold up and there's some things I want to tear down. But like, at the end of the day, I'm still every act of destruction is an act of creation. And I sort of like am trying to engage with the creation and destruction in a constructive way. Because I don't like, even if I like hate the institution of musical theater, which I'm not saying that I do or don't, the form of it is very precious to me. And I want to use it to amplify as much creation as possible, and as much sort of boundary pushing, and as much ideation, and as much imagination as I can. Like, our imaginations are boundless and limitless, and like the theater and musical theater in particular is so powerful. It's like if I were like an evil person, like I could use it as like propaganda to like,
Yeah.
ensnare people in like horrible ideas, but that I'm luckily not an evil person. So I just want to use the form to do whatever I can.
And that's why I think that's part. You're helping to explain what we started with in this conversation, which is, the time it takes to do all that, to be that thoughtful about it, and to want to push it forward. That takes, that and in this most difficult of forms, I think, to get the balance right. That just takes incredible concentration, and to be able to step back and look at your own work and do that. And to be able to like come to Stephen and to Raja and say, wait, no, this song needs to be this whole other thing, or this variation on the thing. That's what it takes to I think move this mountain of a form forward. That's what it is. So
I agree, and it's slow work, and it's so hard to communicate that to people, that the slowness of it, as frustrating as it can be, and we'll have to sit through so much garbage in the meanwhile or whatever, but it's worth it once you get there.
So you do everything. You did everything on A Strange Loop. It really is. And traditionally, musical theater has been kind of like, someone writes the book, someone writes the music, someone writes. Sometimes the same person does music and lyrics, but sometimes it's two people. Musical theater has always been very team oriented. How do you function within that? Or would you be open to like collaborating with someone, for instance, or like I'm always fascinated by the idea of like the team effort and how you maintain your vision within this team environment.
Well, I have another piece that I'm working on that's coming up down the pipe that I am collaborating with someone. I'm collaborating with composer, lyricist Anna K. Jacobs. I'm writing the words, I'm writing the word. We're sharing the book, though I'm writing the dialogue, and he's writing the music and I'm writing the lyrics. And I love collaborating. And I think even when I write alone, as it were, I'm still collaborating with Stephen, with Raja, with the actors, with my music director, with my piano arranger. Like, it's all a collaboration to me, even if I'm the sort of sole generative artist. So it just sort of depends on what the idea is and what it needs.
We have to wrap this up and we have to let you go. But before we do, Michael, I'm just curious, how much joy is this moment for you? To have this happen. Can you sit back amid the hubbub and the 11 Tony nominations, and all the pressure and anxiety of the weekly grosses? Can you just kind of like absorb the magnitude of this and the pleasure in having people just see your work in this form?
I have like so many emotions about it that I think it sometimes comes across very muted to people. And it is in a way, because it's been such a long process for me that by the time we got to opening night, for many people, that was just the beginning. But for me, I felt a weird sense of completion. But at the same time, something that I started doing at Playwrights Horizons that I continue to do on Broadway is I don't necessarily watch the show all the time anymore, but I do often come and talk to people when the show's letting out, just because I'm curious to see how it's hitting people. And that has been
wow.
That's been one of the joys of my life, because people come up to me from all different walks of life and they'll say, I talked about this before, that for some people the show ends up being a mirror, and for other people the show ends up being a window, but that all those people, that energy is being exchanged with each other and going to the stage and coming back and creating its own loop. And so then there are people who say, this is my life. Thank you for that. And it's, I never felt so seen. And then other people will say, this isn't my life, but I really learned something, or it touched on something in my life that's feels the same way but isn't the same thing. And then this gentleman came up to me a couple of weeks ago and was like, he was not being accepted by his family as being gay, and that he brought some of them to see the show, and that it started a dialogue in his family. And like a woman told me that she flew in from Georgia, and that the show really helped her deal with the fact that she hadn't accepted her son as gay as initially, and that he had since sort of become more of an ally for him. And just things like that are very touching to me. And again, especially because the show started as such a personal thing just for me to sort some shit out. That it's grown to be this thing that people can really use in their lives in some way, or that it brings them some understanding or catharsis or whatever that they can sort of carry forward, and that people are coming back multiple times to see the show. And then not to mention, the nominations are amazing for me. That's a professional achievement that I never could have dreamed of. But when I see that these nominations for people like L. Morgan Lee, for John Andrew Morrison, for Stephen Brackett, who is taking so much shit for directing this piece over the years, and never wavered.
Why?
Because he's white, and how dare a white man direct a Black musical? But
wow.
He has been by my side for over a decade.
Right.
Really listening to me. And
he's just a really good director.
He's a really, really good director. And I just am so proud to see him be acknowledged for his work on this piece, which is
Agreed.
so tremendous.
Right.
And those things, like that brings me such joy to see my fellow artists be finally, after years and years and years of flying under the radar, to finally be sort of recognized for the fantastic artists that they are. That brings me joy. And it's everything. Watching the show's success through my parents' eyes is another thing that is worth $1 million to me. My parents, who are not really theater people at all, are now full on a Strange Loop Broadway, kind of junkies.
Yeah, that's great.
And that's great. Just knowing what our history is and everything I know about them, it's hilarious and it's so cool.
All right, well, we're gonna have to have we got to have your parents on now, Michael. But that's
Oh, I think you would die. Talk to my parents. They're as real as it gets. They're wonderful people.
Okay, that's gonna happen. That's gonna happen.
Yeah.
When the tour starts, we're gonna have everybody.
The show in Detroit. I'm really curious what the audience in Detroit.
Oh my God, that's a good story. I'm gonna Elizabeth and I will fight over that with our various publications to do that story.
We're going to Detroit.
I mean, this is the thing. I'm so open to every response to the show. I've gotten it. I invited somebody from the National Review to the show, and he trashed it. Oh my God. He said I was writing critical race theater, and it was insane. But I'm glad, but I'm sort of obsessed with that.
Yeah, got it.
That it inspires many polarizing responses. Why not?
Why not?
That's exactly what I was saying about consensual theater is not good. So I'm glad the National Review is doing its part.
Michael, thank you for joining us today. This has been a pleasure.
Much.
We look forward to the next piece. I look forward to going back to A Strange Loop.
Look forward to the next piece. I'm excited for the next piece. I think it's the only thing that I can do, which is actually my greatest fear.
Best of luck. Thank you again.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Well, that was wonderful. Michael is so smart and so revealing, and he's the real deal.
He absolutely is, and I could listen to him for hours and hours, and I know he could go on for hours and hours easily and never stop being. Every other thing is oh, wow, I never thought of it that way, but yes, that makes sense. No, I just love his approach. Also is very, I think, at the time our culture is becoming so siloed. I love his kind of openness, the way he thinks very openly about things.
Well said.
It's really refreshing to see that.
Yeah. It's everything. It's wanting to relate to a new audience, but understanding the traditions too, and honoring them. His influences extend over the whole history of musical theater. So that's it's inspirational to hear him talk about his own evolution as a writer.
I could not be happier that this show is. I hope it's meeting its audience. It's definitely met the critics. I could not be happier about this, and I do think. I don't want to jinx it, but I do think it's the show to beat at the Tonys. So.
Yes, I think it's good. I'm with you. I think it's going to win the Tony. I would go out on a limb and say, I'll be stunned if it doesn't, and that will give it. More. That'll give it a bounce. Mm-hmm. There will be definitely people, and we should say, obviously the themes are very adult in this show, so that limits somewhat the range of audience that it can attract. But that said, anyone who loves the theater, any grown-up who loves the theater should see this show.
And I also love the fact that he talked about shows being The Lion King being entertaining, because A Strange Loop is also widely entertaining. It's fun.
Right.
It's very it can be very abrasive. It's very deep and it's very emotional, but it's also incredibly funny. And it's just barrels through at an hour and a half or something like that, and it's just. You get on this ride, and it's really just hold on, because you're gonna be rising and dipping on that cyclone. I love that show. I love that show. Okay,
ladies
enough
and gentlemen,
gushing.
ladies and gentlemen, you're going to see that on a shingle outside the theater now, outside the Lyceum. Vincentelli's capsule review for Marx and Vincentelli. Let's generate that. That would help us, I think. But anyway, so Elizabeth, we'll wrap this one up.
Oh my God, yes. That was. I'm still kind of like on a Michael R. Jackson high. Like I feel like he's just like I'm mainlining his energy.
There you go. Well, thank you for listening to this episode of Marx and Vincentelli. I'm Peter Marx.
And I'm Elizabeth Vincentelli.
We'll be back with you soon with another episode. Listen and tell your friends and tell them to subscribe.
Absolutely.